As I sat at our old wood dining table and watched the steam rise from my coffee cup, the morning light came in. Warm light from the kitchen window illuminated the worn wood floor. It should have been a quiet start to the day. The stress in the room was killing me. My husband Eric couldn't stop pacing. He paced back and forth on the squeaky floors, his anger evident in every heavy step. The fight from the night before. The request for money from Eric's sister Marie still hung heavy in the air, like a thick fog that wouldn't go away. Again, it wasn't the first time, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. She asked for my credit card to cover her emergencies, which were usually just excuses to go shopping. Purchasing items on a whim despite my firm refusal initiated a series of events, ended in Eric's fury. I took a sip of my coffee. The bitter taste went with the mood in the room and Eric's rapid pace. The situation was making me nervous, but I tried to maintain a calm face. I could feel his eyes silently observing me. They kept telling me to change my mind, but I couldn't and wouldn't. This went on for Eric. It's been way too long. I broke the tense pause by saying, "We need to talk about this. We cannot continue to tolerate Marie's reckless spending, as it lacks logic. It's not fair to us, and it won't help her in the long run," he told me as he stopped pacing. His face went red. Angry. "It is unjust that you are not assisting Lena. She is my sister, and we must provide for our family. How can you be so self-centered when others depend on you?" I flinched at what he said, but I stood my ground. "Setting limits isn't selfish, Eric. We've helped her. She needs to learn how to handle her own money." Eric's nostrils flared, and I could see the pulse flowing through the vein in his forehead. "You don't get it. You've never had siblings." It felt overwhelming to have so much responsibility. What he said upset me, but I managed to move past it. "Although I don't have siblings, know your duty, and right now our duty is to our own financial security, which we can't keep. We are using our resources to temporarily assist Marie in escaping her own self-made mess." Eric's mood seemed to drop a bit, and I thought that maybe my words had I managed to capture his attention. But as his eyes hardened, I realized I was mistaken. "You're going to give Marie your credit card," he said. He said in a low voice that check was coming here later today, and that you were going to hand it over with a smile on your face. Face. "Do you understand me?" His voice sent a chill down my spine, but I understood. "No, Eric, I won't do that. We need to find other ways to help Marie. We could help her make a budget or find a financial plan that will work for her in the long run. My advisor Dash warned me that I could never finish my term without warning." Eric charged for... He picked up his coffee mug from the counter and hurled it directly at my face. As I watched the dark liquid arc go through, time seemed to slow down. In an instant, hot coffee splashed on my cheek and neck. The blouse hurt like hell, and I gasped in shock as the mug hit the table. I instinctively put my hands to my face as the lolium's floor shattered into pieces. Eric yelled, his words resonating off the walls. I could feel the heat radiating from my skin. "You'll have to pay for the kitchen walls. Marie is coming over later, so you should give her your credit card. Please leave immediately." What he said affected me more than the hot coffee I was staring at. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had married the man I had once loved with all my heart. Now that my heart had shown me how entitled and cruel he was, I wiped my face with a kitchen towel. The pain in my heart as I watched Eric slam the door and storm out of the house was more intense than the pain from the coffee. He closed the door behind him with such force that the framed pictures on the wall shook momentarily. I just stood there and stared. As I looked at the mess on the floor and table, coffee slowly dripped from the edge of the table and formed a small puddle. On the floor, pieces of the broken mug sparkled in the early morning light. It was as if the broken pottery stood for as the shock of what had happened began to wear off. I began to understand what had happened. The house we used to share as a safe place wasn't my home any longer. It had turned into a place where I fought my feelings. I no longer felt safe or respected. The walls that used to protect our hopes and dreams now seemed to close in on me. I shook as I stood up, Eric's anger and Marie's demands pressing down on me. My blouse was sticking to my chest. As I looked around the kitchen, images of Eric and I painting the walls came back to me like a warm blanket. During our first Thanksgiving dinner here, we laughed so much that we got more paint on ourselves than on the walls. Even though we burned the turkey, we still had a wonderful time having coffee at this table every morning. We discussed our aspirations and objectives for the future, yet those recollections felt tarnished by the unpleasantness of the past. There, the laughter had turned into yells, the warmth into cold apathy, and the love into what? No longer sure about the control trick, I went to the bathroom. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I sighed. The hot coffee had made my cheek red and sore. As I carefully washed my face, I could already see the start of a scar. I couldn't help but wonder how we got there. Got to this point? When did Eric's love for his sister turn into this unhealthy obsession? When did I become As I applied a cool compress to my face, I heard Eric's voice. He was an enemy in my own marriage. The phrase, "get the hell out," kept running through my mind. Maybe that's exactly what I did. I had to do something to stay alive. I needed to escape the thoughts of both situations. I felt scared and excited at the same time. Could I really leave? Where would I go? What would I do? I know I should, but when I looked at myself again and saw the pain and fear in my eyes, I knew I had to. Stay here. I couldn't keep living this way. Eric had made a mistake, and it was my responsibility to rectify it. My own line in the sand. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. I had to call someone. Someone needed to help me figure out what to do next, but as I looked through my contacts, I saw how alone I had become. Most of my friends have grown apart over the years because of Eric's controlling behavior or my constant reasons. I couldn't meet up, I stopped at Claire's name. My best buddy from college was always there for me, even when I turned her away. I paused for a moment as I felt awful about telling her I was sorry. I felt guilty for all the times I had disregarded her concerns about Eric, but I overcame the guilt. As soon as the phone rang, I pressed the call button and took a deep breath. What was to come? I was uncertain, yet I was certain of one thing. I couldn't be Eric's target. More literally or figuratively, it was time to reclaim my life and independence and my sense of self-worth. The phone kept ringing, and every second, my resolve got stronger. No matter what happened next, I would deal with it my way. As I waited for CLA to arrive, I stopped giving up my beliefs and putting other people's needs ahead of my own. I promised myself in my head that this would be the last time Eric would ever hurt me. From now on, I was. When I hung up the phone with CLA, I chose to be alone for an hour. I was stunned, and my heart was beating fast, my chest as I relived that morning. The old grandfather clock in the hallway was unbearably loud, marking each passing second of my broken reality. I looked around the living room. Looking at the photos on the walls, I saw our partnership from start to finish. From our first vacation together in Myrtle Beach to our wedding day on the Maine coast, the furniture has played a significant role. The items we selected together in that Charleston antique shop made us feel like silent observers of the slow of our marriage. How did we go from being that happy, in-love couple to this? When I looked down, I saw a framed picture of Eric and me on our honeymoon on the coffee table. I reached out and I picked it up and ran my fingers along the glass. We were in Venice on a boat. We laughed together as Eric tried to take a selfie, and the gondolier rolled his eyes in the background. I thought back to how carefree and hopeful we were, and how sure I was that our love could beat anything, even a drop of water. I realized I was crying as the water splashed on the glass. I placed the picture face down, the table, and couldn't look at it any longer. This house, which used to be our sanctuary, now feels empty. I experienced a sense of confinement. Each corner evoked a memory that I now deemed negative. I raised my hand. Putting my hand to my face, I could still feel the coffee's sting on my skin. The pain reminded me of how far we'd come. Since Eric had crossed the boundary, this was the final strike. There was no turning back. Upon returning from this experience, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The choice I'd been battling with became easier. I suddenly realized I had to leave, and not just temporarily. Once I made up my mind, I acted quickly. I went to our bedroom and found no one there. I opened the closet door in my bedroom and took out the first bag I could find. It was an old one. When I opened the blue Samsonite we received for our honeymoon, several shoeboxes fell off the top shelf. The contents spilled all over the floor as they fell. As I bent down to clean up, I saw a small silk box shaking. When I opened it, I saw the pearl earrings Eric had given me for our first anniversary. I thought about how proud he must have been of me. He had saved for months to purchase them. I almost left them behind for a moment, but I decided not to. He can't have these earrings anymore, they are mine. I tossed them into my bag and began packing. I threw as many clothes and essentials in as I could. My hands were shaking, but my mind was in shock. It was so clear that I could finally see the road in front of me. It was like a fog had lifted. Going through the house on purpose, I picked up the things I couldn't leave behind, like my laptop, which was where I kept everything. I wrote about the old quilt my grandma made for me before I went to college. The small box of letters belonged to my parents, who passed away many years ago. I felt as though I was declaring my freedom and reclaiming the parts of myself that Eric had stolen. Kitchen. I was hesitant to open the cabinet above the fridge because it was hidden behind a stack of barely used cookbooks concealed a small lockbox. I took it out and put in the combination my mother gave me. I'd been saving money for emergencies in this envelope for years, and it was my birthday. There wasn't much, but it would get me started. As I put the money in my bag, I saw the woman looking back at me from the microwave door looked both familiar and strange. Her eyes were red. She had teary eyes and a bruise on her cheek, but there was a resolve in her eyes that told me I hadn't done it, seen in years. I reflected on all the times I had convinced myself that Eric's behavior was due to his work-related stress. Tell myself he'll calm down once things get better with his family, I told myself. He would revert to the man with whom I fell in love if I loved and supported him sufficiently. However, I have since come to the realization that that man might not have lived. My dreams and hopes created the Eric I loved, not the real Eric. Standing in front of me, I went to the study to get important papers about my birth. As I went through the file cabinet, I found our birth certificate, social security card records, and I looked at the marriage document for a moment and thought of the day we stood in front of our family and friends. Those promises of love and honor seemed empty now. On a whim, I grabbed a pen and drew a thick line across the page, a black line through our names. It wasn't legal, but it felt beneficial to let it all out. This marriage was over and I was taking back my identity. As I packed the final items into my car, I glanced back. At the house, we had built what I thought was a life together over 6 years. Now, all that was left was I was angry and hurt that I had given Eric so much of myself, placing my trust in him. I stopped having thoughts of leaving my dreams, my friends, and even my sense of self. I left a note explaining my departure, but what information did it contain that Eric wasn't already aware of? I already knew what he wanted when he threw that coffee mug at me. As I slid into the driver's seat, I felt heavy in my chest. There was also a glimmer of hope. I wasn't just running away. For the first time in years, I was picking the road. Without knowing what was ahead, I had to find my way. As I turned the key in the ignition, I heard Eric's words. Marie will be here later. The shock of it all hit Eric in a new way. I only expected my sacrifices to safeguard my comfort and safety, but they didn't include my financial freedom. He was in for a surprise when Marie showed up to an empty house and saw people driving away. It felt strange, like I was leaving a whole other life. The familiar streets of our neighborhood blurred the past. I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't turn back. I had to drive. My mind was spinning with questions like, where would I stay? What would I do it for? Work. How could I start over at age 35? The unknown was scary, but not as scary as I thought. The thought of returning to that house and confronting Eric's anger and Marie's demands after about an hour was frightening. As I drove, I realized I needed a plan. I pulled into the parking lot of a small diner that looked like Eric's. He turned his nose up at the smell of coffee and bacon inside. I felt my stomach growl for the first time that day. I sat down at a table, ordered a coffee, and then took out my stomach. I looked through my phone's contacts to find someone I could trust. I saw her name again. We hadn't talked much in the past year, but I remembered how she was always there. Even when I pushed her away, I couldn't take my eyes off of her name. What would happen if she refused to hear it? What if she told me I was overreacting? I asked myself. Eric's face, twisted with anger over the situation, crossed my mind. I knew I had to try when I saw the coffee mug flying at me. I pressed the call button and held my breath as the phone rang. On the third ring, Clara's familiar voice was heard. Lena, is everything okay at the even after all this time? The sound of her worried voice made me cry. I told him everything through tears, including the fight with Eric and the coffee mug. Since Hasty Escape CLA didn't talk, they just heard and made soft sounds of... After I finished, there was a brief pause filled with worry and rage, followed by a loud cry. I told Lena, I'm sorry you've been through this, but I'm so proud of you. You did the right thing by leaving, she told me. Her words soothed my hurt soul. For a long time I doubted my abilities. I share my own thoughts and feelings in the hopes that someone will agree with me. The certainty that I had made the right decision was stronger than I had anticipated. As we talked, a plan began to take shape, and CLA knew it. She was a lawyer who assisted women in escaping abusive situations and offered to arrange a meeting for the next day. She told me I had to stay with her. But what about your family? I inquired, because I knew she had 2 small children and didn't want to disturb her. I inquired because I knew she had 2 small children and didn't want to disturb her. CLA said over and over, your family too. We have a spare room and the kids will be thrilled to see their Aunt Lena. By the end of the call, I had more than just someone to cry on my shoulder. I had a lifeline. It felt good to know I wasn't the only one going through this when I hung up the phone. Help, and I had hope for the first time in a long time. I finished my coffee. I gave the waitress a big tip and went back to my car. As I put Clara's address into my GPS, I felt a mix of feelings. Fear of sadness and a rising thrill that it wasn't the end my story. It was a fresh start. When I pulled up to Clara's house, I felt a mix of releasing stress and relieving pain. The small 2-story house with its well-kept yard and bright flower beds that was different from the cold modern house I had shared with Eric. I sat in it for a moment. Getting stronger. What if CLA had changed her mind? What if her husband had said yes? But before I could go any further, the front door flew open. Tom didn't want me there. Open, and CLA rushed out. She had curly red hair just like I remembered. Her warm green eyes seemed to be going everywhere, and she pulled me in right away, into a tight hug. Oh, Lena, she whispered, her voice full of emotion. I'm so glad. As we hugged, I felt something inside me break through all my fear. I let out all the anger and sadness I'd been keeping in as I sobbed into Clara's shoulder. Years of feelings that I hadn't let out. Finally getting some relief, CLA held me while I rubbed relaxing circles on my back. Okay, she said in a whisper. You're safe now that we have you. When I finally pulled away, Tom was standing in the doorway when I wiped my eyes. He gave me a soft smile and a nod. Welcome, Lena, he said. Just come on in. I've got coffee brewing inside. The house was cozy and welcoming, and the toys were spread out in a way that would make a parent proud. There were bright paintings strewn out on the floor of the living room. It was very different from the Saint. Perfectionism was something Eric had always insisted on, and as we sat down in the kitchen with hot coffee, Clara's kids, Emma and Jack, peeked around the corner. 7-year-old Emma would know me from Jack. 4, was shy and hid behind the couch during previous visits and ran over for a hug. Aunt Lena Emma, his sister, asked, "Are you going to stay with us? Can we have a sleepover in the guest room?" I laughed because it felt so good. "Tonight, sweetheart, but maybe another time, okay?" Tom asked as he led the kids away to give I turn to CLA and said, "Thank you." My voice cracked as I said, "I don't." "Do you know what I would have done without you?" Claire shook my hand across the table. "That's what friends are for. Let's figure out what to do next over the next few hours." CLA and I talked about it. She listened to me without judging as I told her more about my relationship with Eric and how things were going. Over the years and how I'd lost myself in the process, I feel so sad. I told myself I was stupid while looking into my coffee mug. I should have left years ago. How did I let things get so bad? CLA shook her head and told Lena, "No, you're not. Abusers who are stupid and good at manipulating people break you down so it goes by so slowly that you don't even notice it. What matters is that you've already left, as we talked about." CLA helped. I began to make a plan. She had already made plans for the next morning with her friend Sarah, a lawyer. Focuses on cases just like yours. Claire said she'll help you with the legal side of things and make sure you're safe. The thought of getting a divorce scared but also freed so many people. Hope and failure had been a part of my life for a long time. I always thought things would get better. Now I was finally ready to break free. "What about work?" I asked as I remembered. The job I quit. I was a part-time librarian, which was Eric's job. Thought was right for me after I gave up on becoming a writer. Claire's eyes lit up. "I might haven't thought about that. Do you remember my cousin Megan? She runs that little store downtown. The Cozy Corner. She said the other day that she needs help, but it's not many things. But the thought of working in a bookstore with all the books and the smell of I fell in love with paper and ink all over again. It was a world away from the business world Eric had always pushed me toward, but it felt right. And as the night went on, we began. It was too much for me to handle to keep track of all the things I needed to do, people I needed to call and things I needed to buy. I felt more in charge than I had in years when I had a plan. "Oh, Claire, I almost forgot to say that." "I have something for you," she said, and she went into another room. When she came back, she had a small gift bag in it. Inside was a new cell. I picked up the phone this afternoon. She told me it was a prepaid one, so Eric can't find it or get to the records. Just to be safe, you should use this from now on. It was safe, and I stared at the phone with a lump in my throat. Thing. But it was another step toward freedom. "Thank you," I said in a whisper. As we were ending our planning meeting, I couldn't find the words to thank CLA enough, so she demanded I bring her guest. We need a safe place to sleep, so she told us straight out, "We can go to your hotel tomorrow to check out and get your things." That night, as I lay in bed, as I lay in a strange bed and listened to the quiet sounds of a happy family home, I couldn't help but think about Eric. Would have known I wasn't there. Would he be scared or mad? Would he even care? I thought about Marie showing up at our meeting at Eric's house to get my credit card. It made me feel a little bad to think about how shocked and confused they must be. But then I remembered how angry Eric was. The flying coffee mug and my resolution became stronger as I fell asleep. I hadn't thought about the future in years. What did I want my life to be like? Who did I want to be in it? To be because I wasn't limited by being Eric's wife. The next morning I woke up early and felt more rested. I smelled like coffee and bacon and could hear the happy chaos of Claire's. It was the best I had felt in months. Family getting ready for the day. For a moment I lay there enjoying the peace. After a quick shower, I joined CLA and her family for breakfast. I felt ready to take on the day and all of its difficulties. The kids talked happily about their plans for the day over breakfast, and Tom checked their work in between. Pieces of toast. It was such a simple, real scene of happiness that I felt a prick in my chest. This was how a family should be, as CLA and I got ready to. A mix of nerves and determination filled me as I left for my meeting with lawyer Sarah. I knew what the road ahead held. It wouldn't be easy. Eric wouldn't let me go without a fight, and I still didn't know a lot of things. But as I looked at CLA, who dropped everything to help me, I learned something important. I wasn't going through this alone. My friends were there for me. Before we left, I took out my new phone for the first time in a long time, and after some thought typed a message to Eric that said, "I'm safe. I'm not. If you're coming back, don't try to get in touch with me. My lawyer will be calling soon." Pressed the send button, but I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. Should I give him one more chance? Then I saw Eric's eyes light up as he threw that mug. Years of lying had worn off. And power, and I knew this wasn't just about getting out of a bad position. I hit send as CLA, and I wrote about taking back my life, my identity, and my future. As I walked out to her car, I felt like a weight had been taken off my shoulders. The road ahead was vague, but for the it was my choice what would happen next. For the first time in years, I would face it on my own terms. I climbed into the I was sitting in the passenger seat, ready for the next part of my trip. When CLA started the car, she smiled and looked over at me. "Are you ready?" she asked. I took a big breath and said yes. Then we left. As I pulled out of the driveway and started my new life, the law office of Sarah Thatcher was nothing like I thought it would be. Instead of the scary, germ-filled place I had expected, it was warm and welcoming, with potted plants all over the place. Corner and the walls were covered with bright, abstract art while CLA and I were there. While I was waiting, I looked at a particularly colourful piece and tried to figure out what it meant. Lena AA voice woke me up. When I looked up, I saw a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense look on her face. "Hello, my name is Sarah. Please come in." As we sat down in her office, Sarah's eyes lit up. Seeing the slowly going away bruise on my cheek, she eased her tone. CLA filled her words were gentle, but she told me the facts. "I'd like to hear everything from you if possible." "That's fine." I told Sarah my story for an hour while she listened carefully. Sometimes she asked for more information or took notes when I was done. She leaned back in her chair and looked at Lena with a face that showed both pity and steel. "What happened to you is not okay. It's abuse," she said in a strong but kind voice. Simple as that, but leaving was the first and hardest thing you could have done. "Now let's talk about how we're going to." Sarah made a plan to keep you safe and your future safe over the next few hours. She said she would file for divorce right away, claiming irreconcilable differences and Eric's abusive behaviour, how to get a restraining order and what steps we could take to get a temporary alimony to help me get back on my feet. I asked, "What about the house?" I was thinking of the house Eric and I shared. Sarah's eyes lit up. "I have an idea about what they had shared for 6 years. That because of Eric's behaviour, we might be able to give you temporary sole use of the house. This could help you in a weapon in the divorce process." The thought of going back to that house made my stomach turn, but I knew at the same time that strategic value was bothering me. Eric's sister Marie was also on my mind. I said, "She's been a big part of our problems." Eric told Sarah that she was going to get my credit card. Sarah gave him a serious nod. "We'll also have to deal with that. Financial abuse is a big problem, and we'll make sure of it, to keep your money and credit safe." As the meeting ended, I felt a mix of Sarah felt feelings like fear of the unknown and a growing sense of power, gave me a plan of the way forward that I couldn't see before. Remember what Sarah said? We said goodbye. You're stronger than you think. It won't be easy, but you can do it. You don't have to. Back at Cla's house, we sat at the kitchen table and went over everything Sarah had told us about CLA. Organising things her teacher taught her was coming in handy as she made a list of things we needed to do, her pen on the paper. "We need to get all of your important papers together, change your passwords and start." Writing down everything, and I thought, "Oh, and we should probably think about getting you some new clothes and essentials." I told CLA in a soft voice, I don't know. I was overwhelmed, but thankful for her help. I have no idea how I'll ever repay you for everything you've done for me. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Besides, she said with a smile, I always knew Eric was a jerk. Someone needs to take him down a peg. We called and emailed each other for the rest of the afternoon. My joint credit cards were cancelled, all of my passwords were changed, and I even got a new email address. As night fell, I felt like I was recovering a part of myself with each step. Clara's phone rang, and she quickly glanced at it. Then she looked at me with a mix of joy and fear. It was Megan. She asked if you could come in for an interview tomorrow for the job at the shop, which made my heart race. Working in a shop had always been a dream of mine, but Eric had told me it wasn't possible. Now was my chance to make it happen, I said to myself, startling myself. Tell her yes with a firm voice that night as I lay in the guest bed. A lot of things were going through my head. I thought about Eric and wondered if he was worried about me or just mad. About Marie, picturing how shocked she was when she got home to find it empty. A part of me felt bad, but a bigger part felt free. I woke up early the next morning with a lot of nervous energy. CLA helped me choose an outfit for the interview. I felt both professional and true to myself in a simple shirt and skirt outfit at the Cozy Corner bookstore. It was everything I had imagined, and there were more shelves with books on them from floor to ceiling. The air was filled with the Megan Clara's cousin was a happy woman who smelled like paper and ink. Shortcut and a laugh that makes you want to join in, she told me after we talked for a while about books and my experience with CLA. Tell me you're in a tough spot. I wasn't sure how much to share at first, but Megan's open eyes and smile made me feel safe as I left my husband. I said them, but they still felt weird on my tongue. I need a new start, Megan nodded her head seriously. Well, I can't offer you much in terms of pay. No, at least not at first. But I can give a safe place to work with flexible hours and the chance to be around. I could read books all day. That sounds like heaven. When can I begin? I couldn't hold back my excitement as I asked Megan, what about next? She laughed. If you leave on Monday, you'll have time to get things in order. I felt a rush of hope as I held my new employee handbook. For the first time in years, I was making choices for myself, making my own plans. But my sudden hope didn't last long when I went back to Clara's house. I saw her pacing in the kitchen, her face tight with fear. What's wrong? My heart asked. CLA paused and then gave me her phone. There were a bunch of texts on the screen. There were texts from Eric that made my blood run cold when I read them. Where is she? Demanded. I know you're hiding her. The texts got worse and worse, ending with the threat, I'll come get her myself if she doesn't come home by tonight. I could feel the room spin. My knees are about to give out. CLA steadied me and led me to a chair. It's okay. To be clear, she told him, he doesn't know you're here, and we won't let him get close to you. Eric would not stop thinking about something once he set his mind to it. I feel sick because he's here putting CLA and her family in danger. I need to leave. It was hard for me to say it, but I can't put you in danger. CLA shook her head angrily. We're not in this together. And she added a stern look to her face. I think she quickly called a number on her phone with her eye. Sarah, it's CLA, we need your help. How quickly can you get that protection order? I sat at the kitchen table, with my mind running as I told Sarah what was going on. I thought about everything that in the last few days, leaving Eric to meet with CLA again and talk to Sarah about the job at the Eye was so far along that I couldn't let Eric pull me back. Now a plan was starting to take shape. I thought it was dangerous and maybe even cruel at first, but as I thought about it, after hearing Eric's threats about years of control and manipulation, I knew it was time. When CLA hung up the phone, I breathed in deeply. I have an idea, I said, but I need your help. As I saw Clara's eyes widen, and then a slow smile spread across her face. Oh, Lena, she said, Making a note of her voice was full of praise. "I always knew you had it in you," she said. For the rest of the day, we worked on your plan. As a result, we called, emailed, and got ready for what was to come in the evening. As they got closer, I felt a strange calm settle over me. No matter what happened next, I was. As the sun went down, long shadows started to cast across Clara's living room. Stood by the window and watched the street outside. Eric was about to make his move. I would be ready for him this time, though, and I would be in charge. It was almost time for the storm, but for the first time in years, I wasn't scared. I was ready to handle whatever came next on my own terms. The sky was turning orange and pink from the setting sun when I heard a car pull up. As I peered through the blinds and saw Eric's sleek black car in the driveway, my heart started to beat faster. Marie was in the passenger seat of my Audi, and I took a big breath to myself. What was going to happen? Was this the moment of truth? "They're here," I told CLA, was sitting on the couch trying to look relaxed, even though the room was tense. She smiled and nodded, which made me feel better. "Do not forget that we are here with you." I saw Eric and Marie get out of the car. Their looks were Eric was wearing his best power suit and was angry and proud at the same time. He always wore this one to scare someone. Marie looked ready for an in her designer dress and high heels. Night out instead of a fight with the family. As they walked up to the front door, I could hear them talking. Marie's voice could be heard in the evening air. "I can't believe she had the nerve to just leave like that," she said. "Screams with anger after all you've done for her." Eric's answer was too low for me to hear, but the clenched jaw told me everything I needed to know about his mood. The doorbell rang, and the happy sound of the chime was a sharp contrast to the "it" was tense, and CLA squeezed my hand one last time before she went to answer it. When I heard Clara's voice, I thought, "Eric, Marie, what a surprise." "Cut the crap." "Where is she?" CLA, Eric growled. "I know Lena is here. Why don't you come in?" CLA. She answered in a neutral tone. "We can talk about this, Civvy." I heard their footsteps as the hall got near. My palms started to sweat, but I forced myself to stay. I was going to stay calm because I had a plan. Eric walked into the living room all of a sudden. Room first, and his eyes went straight to me. For a split second, I saw a flash of, he looked relieved at first, but then grew angry as he spoke to Lena. "That's dangerously low. What the hell are you doing?" I stood up, straightened my back, and looked at him. I looked Eric right in the eye and said, "I'm leaving you." I was surprised by how steady my voice was. "Sounded like our marriage is over," Marie gasped out loud, and Eric's face lit up. Angry. "You can't just leave," he spit at you. "You're my wife." "Tasks and duties. My only duty is to myself," I answered. "I feel stronger than ever. I'm done being your hitting bag, Eric." Marie stepped forward and flashed her eyes. "How dare you?" As she watched you put your sister's wants ahead of our marriage. "Eric has always taken care of you, you selfish little dash." "That's enough," Claire said, cutting her off. "You have nothing to do with this, Marie. This is between Lena and Eric." Eric turned to CLA, He clenched his arms and said, "Stay out of this. This is family business." I laughed because the sound was so bad I could hear it myself. "Is that what you call it when you throw coffee mugs at my head? Tell me to give my credit card to your sister." Eric looked awkward for a moment, but he didn't say anything. "You're not being serious. It was just a small fight. If you just come home, we can work this out." I shook my head, sad and angry at the same time. "Resolve no, Eric. We can't work this out. I've already made up my mind, and you can't just change your mind," Eric yelled as he walked toward me. "I won't let you ruin it." I was a little scared when Eric advanced, told me about everything we'd built, but before he could get any closer, a new voice broke the silence and said, "That's enough, Mr. Campbell." We all turned around and saw Mr. Thatcher standing in the doorway. He was a guy who commanded attention. His neatly pressed suit and serious face made him look like a real lawyer, and Eric's eyes grew big in shock. First there was surprise, then suspicion. "Who the hell are you?" Mr. Thatcher stepped in, walked into the room slowly and calmly, saying, "I'm Mr. Thatcher, Lena's lawyer, and I want you to step back from my client." Eric's face showed shock. It was almost funny how he looked back and forth between Mr. Thatcher and me and the attorney. "Lena, what is this?" I took a deep breath and got strength from hearing that Mr. Present. "That's exactly what it looks like, Eric. I'm going to file for divorce." Marie, a dramatic "you can't be serious" split Eric, "do something." But Eric. It looked like Mr. Thatcher was frozen in place, his face a mask of shock. Due to his continued silence, he said, "Mrs. Campbell has hired me to handle the divorce proceedings. Even though it seems professional, there is a sneaky feeling that all future communication about this subject should go through." Eric finally found his voice and said, "This is ridiculous. Lena, you can't do that. Just decided to get a divorce without telling me first. I think the coffee mug you threw at her was the last straw." "Those talks," Mr. Campbell and Mrs. Thatcher answered calmly, and Eric's face turned pale. "I didn't mean for Dash to save it for the court, Eric. I'm done listening to your reasons." Marie, who had been unusually quiet all of a sudden, spoke up and asked, "What about me? What about my needs?" Eric replied, "Don't worry about me." Turned his steely gaze on her. "Miss Campbell, your worry about Mrs. Campbell's finances is over." Marie's mouth moved back and forth like a fish out of water, for she seemed to be lost for words at one point. Eric, on the other hand, was getting his cool back. Once more, shock turned to anger. "You think you can just walk away?" he growled. "After everything I've done for, I felt a rush of anger because you took everything I gave you." "Eric, have you really given me a life where I have to be careful what I say? Friends, I had to give up my hopes and my sense of self. That's not a gift, that's a jail." What I said hit Eric like a punch, and he fell to the ground. I saw a moment of confusion and pain on his face as he leaned back a little. I caught a peek of the man I fell in love with years ago, but his face hardened again and he spat, "If this would you like to play it? If so, let's do it. I'll fight you all the way, Lena. You won't get anything, Mr. Thatcher." Stepped forward and put himself between Eric and me. "I wouldn't recommend that, Mr. Campbell, my customer. Has a lot of proof that you've been violent if you decide to fight this. Of that will be shown in court. I think you should carefully think about your options." Eric's face turned pale. He turned around and spoke out in anger, but Mr. Thatcher cut him off. He said, "I think we're done here. I'll be in touch with the divorce papers. Until then, I think you should hold off on calling Mrs. C directly." Eric looked. He looked like he wanted to argue more, but Mr. Thatcher's face made him change his mind. He turned to his eyes were burning with anger and something that looked like fear. "This isn't over, Lena," he told me. His voice was low and scary, and I met his steady gaze. "Yes, Eric, it is." With one last glare, Eric stormed out of the house, leaving Marie behind like a sad dog as the door slammed shut. Just behind them, I felt my knees give out from happiness. CLA was there in an instant. As I sank onto the couch, she whispered, "You did it," and pulled me in. "Lena, give me a hug and tell me I'm proud of you." Mr. Thatcher cleared his throat softly. "You did a great job with that, Mrs. Campbell. It's not easy to stand up to someone who hurts you, but you were very strong in doing that." I looked up at him, feeling both thankful and tired. "Thank you. I could not have done it without your help, Mr. Thatcher." He gave a small nod. Stern smiled and said, "This is just the beginning, but you've already taken the hardest step. We'll take care of the rest. Take a break together." I sat on the couch while Mr. Thatcher packed his things to leave. I was trying to figure out what had just happened. The fight I had been fearing for days was over, and I'd more than that. I stood my ground, and CLA brought me a cup of tea. She sat down next to me on the couch and asked gently, "How are you feeling?" I took a taking a sip of the warm drink and letting it calm my frayed nerves. I'm not sure I felt calm, scared, and free at the same time. CLA squeezed my hand, which is normal. A big change, but know that you're not the only one going through it. As the fight ended, I could feel the weight of everything I had been through lift off my shoulders. Along with the sadness and fear, there was a small but real spark of hope. I felt a bright fire in my chest. It had been years since I had been free to make my own future. The road ahead would be hard, but as I sipped tea with CLA and watched the sun go down, as the sun went down, I knew one thing for sure. I was ready for whatever came next in the weeks that followed. The time I spent with Eric was blurred by meetings, papers, and feelings. Changes every day brought new problems and little wins that I loved. I found myself writing down these. No matter how small they seemed, the first night I slept through the night without having dreams was a big deal. The first day I didn't think about Eric at all, because I laughed without feeling bad. CLA had made me stay with her family, until I got back on my feet, even though I told her she was forcing nonsense firm. That's why you have friends, and besides, the kids love having you. Emma and Jack had started calling me Aunt Lena and including me in their stories and games, so I knew I was here. Their innocent love soothed my hurt spirit, and my job at the cozy corner shop quickly turned into my Megan was a kind and patient boss who was always ready with a smile or a cup of tea when I needed one. Overpowered, the quiet rhythm of putting books on shelves and suggesting titles to customers and getting lost in a new book helped me stay grounded when things felt out of control one wet afternoon. About a month after I left Eric, I was restocking the fiction area when I saw a book I knew. I remember reading Awakening by Kate Chopin in college. It's the story of Edna. Pontellier's journey to self-discovery struck a chord with me even then. So I took the book off the shelf and started to read. As I got lost in Edna's story, I felt I had a connection with her through her fight for independence and her desire. It all felt so familiar when I got to the part where Edna says I would live my life on my own terms. Let go of the things that aren't important. I'd give my money and my life for my kids, but I wouldn't give myself. Megan saw me crying alone in the middle of the street, and tears came to my eyes. Out of the fiction aisle and sat down next to me, offering a tissue and being there for me when I needed support. Brought herself together enough to say that she had carefully listened. She said, after a moment, books have a way of coming to us just when we need them most. Maybe this is your awakening, Lena. That night as I lay in bed in class, long after my shift was over. In the guest room, I thought about all the parts of myself I had given up when I was married to Eric. What I was writing about my hopes of travelling, and even my favourite foods had to be put on hold so that I could be a good wife. The next morning I woke up with a drive I hadn't had in years. I got my old laptop out of the closet, the bottom of my bag, and I started to write I wrote about my marriage in a way that was messy, honest, and true. Slowly falling apart of my self-esteem around the time I chose to leave it wasn't beautiful or well kept, but it was mine. As the days turned into weeks, I fell into a new routine. I got more warnings about writing and putting all of my feelings and ideas on the page before the rest of the... When the world woke up, I'd go to the bookstore and lose myself in books and the quiet company of other readers. Many evenings with other book lovers were spent with CLA and her family, or I read again by myself. I got back into old hobbies and interests I hadn't done in a long time thanks to Mr. Thatcher. Eric stayed true to his word, fought every step of the way, but with Mr. Thatcher's help and the proof we gathered, I was sure. At the very least, each report caused us a mix of stress and relief. I felt relieved that the fight brought me one step closer to true freedom one Saturday. About 2 months after I left, CLA persuaded me to go to yoga class with her. "It'll be good for you," she said. "Help you get back in touch with yourself." I wasn't sure about it, but I agreed to give it a shot. It was warm and cozy in the studio, and there was a pleasant smell of lavender in the air as we walked around. I had trouble with the poses not only physically but also mentally for years. Stress and strain had made my body stiff and unwilling to move, but as I breathed through each move I felt something. As we lay in Savasana near the end of class, they began to move. I felt the words, "You are strong, you are worthy, you are enough," and I believed it after class for the first time in longer than I could remember. I was red and a little sore, but I turned to CLA and said, "Thank you." I felt more alive than I had in years. As she smiled, she looked me in the eyes and squeezed my hand. That night, it was a dream about Eric. He was yelling at me, his face red with anger, he spoke, but I couldn't understand him. It was like watching a mute movie. I woke up quickly, my heart racing, but as I lay there I learned something new for the first time in the dark. His anger didn't scare me. It made me sad to see the man he had become, but I no longer felt responsible for his feelings. The next morning I told him this, having a revelation with CLA over coffee. She listened carefully and then said, "You know, I think you're ready for the next step, Lena." "What do you mean?" I asked. The woman said in a soft voice, "I think it's time for you to find your own place." "It's not that we don't love having you here," she said, "but because I think you're ready to stand on your own." The thought of it made me happy and scared at the same time. Could I really do it? To take care of myself, but as I thought about it, I realized CLA was yes. It was time. Looking for an apartment was both fun and there were too many things to think about, like position, cost and safety. Now that I felt more confident, Clara helped me find a small studio room close to the moving day. Was a whirlwind of action for me. It wasn't much, but it was mine. CLA, Tom, and even the kids helped me by evening with my few belongings. We're unpacked, and my new place was beginning to feel like home as we laughed and ate pizza on the floor. I felt so thankful for these people who had become like family to me. When everyone else left, I stood in the middle of I'm taking a second to enjoy my new flat. I bought used furniture at thrift stores a few weeks ago. The things I had brought with me to live with Eric and the new things I had bought for myself all came together to make a space that was just mine. I went to the window and saw the city lights for the first time in months. I let myself think about more than just the right now, which was the divorce process and starting a new life. But what did I want in the long run? Who did I want to be as I stood there? That made me think of something my grandmother used to say. Life is a story, and you're the author. Let other people tell my story. Eric, his family and social norms, but now with the pen in my hand, I could write any story I chose. I went back to as I looked at my laptop on the small desk in the corner of my apartment today, an idea started to form in my mind. Maybe it was time to write that book I'd always wanted to, but not for Eric or anyone else. I wanted to write it for myself. I sat down at the desk with a smile and opened my laptop. The page was blank. I took a big breath and started to type chapter 1 of The Awakening. It no longer seemed scary but full of possibilities. As the words came out on the page, I felt calm. The road ahead was still unknown, but I knew it would be hard because the divorce wasn't final yet, and there were still days when the weight of everything I had been through was about to get to me. But as I wrote my own story in my new home, I knew one thing. I knew one thing for sure. I would be okay. No, I would thrive. This was not just a new part of my life. It was a whole new story. I was excited to see how it would all play out. As the sun rose through my window for the first time, I stopped writing. I had lost track of time. The world of my story, I stretched and felt the good pain of muscles that had been still for too long. So I went to the kitchen to make some coffee while I watched the sky turn pink with the sunrise. I raised my mug in a quiet toast to new beginnings to be found again. I am strong for all the amazing things that could happen in my new chapter.